ends that verse. He says, "But the time and chance happeneth to them all." And so this phrase here, the idea of chance, time and chance is what he uses. And we understand, in the English and our understanding of chance is kind of a misnomer. Nothing happens by chance. And, we always say, well, I'll flip a coin. You call heads, they'll call tails, and it was by chance that I got heads. But that's not chance, right? There's so many factors go into it. There's oil that comes off your finger, gets on the coin, how hard I flip it, how many times it flips, what's the humidity in the air. There's so many things that go into it. So when it's heads, it's determined that it's going to be heads based on all these other things that we don't know about. So we go, it was by chance. It wasn't chance, right? And as we understand, the providence of God, it's really not chance. God oversees in all matters. So the word used here in the Hebrew is hega. It means an occurrence. That's all it means. An occurrence. A time and an occurrence happens to them all. So 3 things we know. We know that according to the Word of God and according to Ecclesiastes, we've seen a number of times, everything is dependent upon the sovereignty and the providence of God in life. And some things happen that we wouldn't expect. Oh, sorry, Brother Bill.
Psalm 103:19. Yahweh has established his throne in the heavens, and his sovereignty rules over all.
All things, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing goes by without, and sometimes evil happens in the world. And we go, how did that happen? Well, God permitted it to happen for whatever reason. He's got a bigger purpose in mind, and we don't always understand that. Why did this thing happen in Israel? Evil men live in the world. And that's our second point. Because we live in a fallen world, we are subject to the fallenness of this world. Bad things happen to good people. Right? And number 3, because of the evil that's here, we may suffer the repercussions of it. Right? The man doesn't know his time. The man doesn't know those things. And evil continues to go on. We understand there's a devil. And he's got a host of demonic creatures that are also out there, and God works with both, right? He permits things to happen, and Satan has a lot of authority in this world. The verse in Luke that says, he offered Christ the kingdoms of the world, and he said, it's in my power and authority to give it to whoever I wish. So God has granted him, and we don't understand all the rules of the spirit world, only what comes out in the Bible. And there's probably many more we just don't understand. And so, but God permits certain things to happen, and he's given certain authority to Satan, who's called the god of this world, the prince of the ruler of this world. And so some of these evil things happen. And in verse 12, he'll go on to make some illustrations. He says, "For man knoweth not his time." And then he talks about the fish. And the analogy is, the fish are free, and they're just swimming around, but then all of a sudden somebody throws a net in the water, and they get caught, right? Poor little fish, right? Then he talks about birds in a snare. The birds are free, they're flying around, all of a sudden, bang, they go into a trap, and they're caught. And the sons of men, he mentions here too. Same thing happens with us. There's evil people out there, and there's evil things out there, and sometimes we get caught and we suffer the repercussions. So are the sons of men snared in an evil time. When it falls suddenly upon them, is what he says there. And so the evil time can happen at any moment, at any time, because we live in a fallen world. James chapter 1 says, "Count it all joy when you fall into diver temptations." And he's talking about that word diver is an old English word. It means diversity, multiplicity. And so we count it joy when we fall into, and the word trials there, or temptation, can be trials. It can be translated either way. So James is saying, we're going along in life and we think everything's fine, and then all of a sudden 4 or 5 things hit us all at one time. And he says we kind of fall into these trials, and they're testings from God. And the hand of God is not like he's not there. He is there. And every time we face a trial, God is trying to test to see if our loyalty is there, if we really love him. Right? Do you really love me? Right? That's always the test. Are you going to follow me? Are you going to keep trusting me? Right? And so that's James's perspective on it. So we got to be alert. We got to be aware that there are things are going on. Maybe I can avoid a pitfall, right? But these are all tests from the Lord. And then the next point we got here is wisdom is surprising and often forgotten, verses 13 through 17. This wisdom have I seen also under the sun, and it seemed great unto me. And then he's going to give a little parable. So, but verse 13, the first thing he says there, it's great to have wisdom in life. Why? Well, James said, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, right? Because we're falling into these dire temptations, these trials, and sometimes we just need the wisdom of God to get through them. You know, I can come up with a dozen different verses and proverbs, and one says one thing, one says another thing, and which one do I follow? And sometimes we need wisdom from God, and then so he does say pray. Right? Pray and ask God for wisdom to get you through that particular trial. And he says, if any man asks that, he's going to give it to you. He's not going to hold back, right? He's not going to scorn you because you came 20 times today, right? He's going to give you the wisdom that you're asking because he knows that's. And so Solomon says it's great to have wisdom living in this world because we face big decisions, illnesses, crisis happen. So we're people that need wisdom. And then he gives a kind of an ironic type of, we call it a mini parable. So I'll read it to you here. It's in verse 14. And he says, and there was a little city with a few men within it, and there came a great king against it and besieged it and built great bulwarks against it. And now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he, by his wisdom, delivered the city. Yet no man remembered that same poor man. And so kind of an ironic type of parable. You have this little city, and a great king comes with a great army. He besieges it, and he's going to overthrow the city, but then there's in the midst of the city this poor man, but he's pretty wise. And somehow, we don't know what it is, but he figures out a way how to outdo the king and beat him and stop the invasion. You know, great thing. He delivered the city is what it says. But then another little twist happens in this whole thing. All of a sudden, nobody remembers the poor wise man. Right? He's forgotten. And it could be a lack of gratitude. People weren't really thankful because we know in the Bible, you know, that's why, you know, in the Bible it's always saying, give thanks to the Lord, remember the Lord, right? Because if you don't give thanks, you're not going to remember. So we set up holidays, right? We have Thanksgiving. We don't want to forget, right? We have certain holidays of the year to remember certain events so we can be thankful for whatever it is, right? And so, but the man's all of a sudden pushed aside and forgotten. So we ask the question, why would that be if he was such a great man, if he delivered this city? And part of the reason is, I think, because he's poor, they don't listen to him, right? And so if he's a poor man, he's not regarded as a really great man, and so he could be easily forgotten. So Solomon kind of goes at this in verse 16, and he says, wisdom is better than strength, because, and maybe he's speaking like the world that would say this, but here's the man that just delivered the city from this great king, right? And so he says in verse 16, wisdom is better than strength. The king had great strength, but we had a wise person here that helped us, and somehow, we don't know how, he delivered all of us from this wicked, powerful king. But then he goes on to say, but the poor man, nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. And so a couple of things come out of this. One is, because he's a poor man, they don't really care, but they don't think he's really that great of a man, so his wisdom is despised. But he may be the wisest of them all. You know? I mean, you know, it's kind of like, well, who am I? Right? So, you got these mega churches and these guys got big names and they say all these things and it sounds great, and then here comes some guy in a little church of 50 people and he says, hey, I got an idea, and people go, who's he, right? I don't care. I'm just a nobody serving God, right? And so, but nobodies are really somebodies in the eyes of God, but to the common man, it's despised, right? The other thing that comes out of this is, don't expect the world to pat you on the back, right? When you come up with, you share the gospel, you share wisdom, they're not going, oh, man, this is really great, right? You don't get that type of response from the world. So, you can say what you say, but don't expect the world to pat you on the back and applaud you, right? We'll give you an award. Not going to happen, right? However, Solomon puts another twist into this in verse 17 because he says sometimes the opposite will happen. So let's see what he says here. Verse 17, the words of a wise man are heard in quiet, more than the cry of them that ruleth among the fools. And so Solomon says, but sometimes if you get them alone and you talk one-on-one with them, right, they might listen. Right? And that's what he's talking about. If you get him alone in a quiet setting, and you just one-on-one with the guy, you might be able to get to him, and maybe he will listen. And so he says the words of a poor wise man, or a wise man heard in quiet, that avails much. It's better than the screaming and the shouting of the fool among the crowd, right? They get a big mob out there, and then they can say anything they want, and hype the crowd up, and do all this, and a lot of times it's just foolishness. And so sometimes it's the one-on-one that actually is the wisest way to approach a matter, too, up and against the rich and the famous and the fools who are in the crowd that shout. And then number 4, the fourth thing he says here in verse 18, wisdom is better than weapons of war because you can accomplish much with wisdom, right? More than we're going to take arms up and fight. So it's better to negotiate, better to talk to people. So in that sense, wisdom is better than the weapons of war. And here it goes back to this king that came in and tried to conquer the city, but he couldn't do it because somebody was wise enough to figure out how to outdo the king and stop the invasion. But then the last phrase is interesting. He says, but one sinner destroyeth much good. And I think this is a warning against gossip, So somebody gets up and gives some good counsel and somebody else cuts them down. And you can be doing a lot of good things and building a work, and if one guy comes along and he's going to gossip and say negative things and just tear the whole thing down, it's very destructive. And I think that's the point here. One person, here you got the guy of wisdom, and he's given wisdom, it's better than the weapons of war, but one guy comes along and can tear the whole thing down. And so we need to be careful. Don't follow the crowd, and then be careful what you listen to. Right? Because gossip can only happen when people listen to it, right, and receive it and then pass it on. That's how gossip spreads. So that finishes chapter 9. So we'll try to move right into chapter 10 here. And it is kind of a continuation of the same thought that he has as he's dealing with, and we just entitled this chapter, Wisdom versus Foolishness. And that seems to be the theme that Solomon's continuing on. And it seems like, you fit into one category or the other, and in some ways the wise are the saved and the foolish are the unsaved, but sometimes the saved can be the fools, and that happens quite a bit. So again, you'll see a bunch of proverbs that he'll lay out throughout the chapter. And number 1 is there is wisdom in maintaining a good reputation. So verse 1 says, dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. And so dead flies, he talks about here, in the Hebrew is actually flies of death, and that's the way it actually reads. There's actually no of in the Hebrew, they just put these words together, you got to insert, there's no such thing as of. but you gotta insert it. And they do it in a certain way where you know that's probably what it is. They call it a construct chain, and you know that's what it must mean. There's no accusative case, or there's no genitive case of possession. So he says flies of death, and there's a debate over how to translate that. The point here is that if you got a fly that lands in very expensive ointment, and it dies, and it's in that, you ruin the ointment, right? You want to keep that clean and protect it. Here comes the fly, goes in, and then it dies, and it could even make it rancid, and it can stink, is what it says. You know, it's dead bugs are in there long enough to maybe make it stink. It was supposed to be a good aroma and a very expensive perfume or ointment. And so, even so, he says, and he makes the application, a little bit of folly can do what? It can ruin a person's reputation. Right? Now, we just ended chapter 9 with this whole issue of gossip. It can destroy. Well, here, you know, you can spend months and years building, and then all of a sudden you say one stupid thing, right? Or you do one stupid thing, and I really botched this thing up, and it really can ruin a reputation of someone. Well, we see it in politics, you see it in church ministry. You can have a family get together. We're all together, and then your cousin gets up and says, I'm stupid, and it kind of destroys the whole thing. It's like, oh, here he goes again. It can ruin a gathering. It can ruin a church, right? And it can ruin a person's reputation in the community. You're trying to build that. So it's a prohibition against that. And so, pride is often the issue, right? A lot of times it's pride in a person's heart that causes them to do one thing or another, and it gets in the way. And so what we think is trivial sometimes, and we think, oh, it's not that big of a deal, sometimes it is a big deal, and it makes an impact in the lives of other people. So I wrote down 3 passages of Scripture that maybe this person didn't think it was a really big deal, but it was really a big deal. So I thought we could look up a couple of these. First one is 2 Samuel chapter 12. And these were actually all big deals, but maybe the person maybe they felt like it wasn't a big deal. So 2 Samuel 12:14, and of course this is David after he sins with Bathsheba, and Nathan, the prophet, actually goes to him and David said unto Nathan, I have sinned. This is after he gets confronted. I have sinned against the Lord, he said. And Nathan said unto him, the Lord hath also put away thy sin. Thou shalt not die. So God forgives you. And then verse 14, howbeit, because of this deed, thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme. And the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. There's great repercussions for that. But the key point here is, David really botched it up. Everybody knew it. He was in the position of being a king, and he really botched this. I mean, this is a major issue. And he was maybe trying to sweep it under the carpet, like, that's not that big of a deal, right? And Nathan said, you've given all the enemies of God a great occasion to blaspheme. They can look at you, they can look at your reputation, they can point the finger at you, even though, you asked for forgiveness and God forgave you. But now they can blaspheme the Lord. And this is a warning to us, because when we botch it up, and we're out there witnessing, and we're supposed to be a Christian, and then they look at our lives, and they go, yeah, but look at him, look at what he's doing, and it becomes a great occasion for the enemies of God to blaspheme the Lord, speak negatively of the Lord. So the next passage in 1 Kings 11, and I think this is the Solomon one. We might have looked at this a few weeks ago, I can't remember. But in 1 Kings 11:9, the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice. So God actually appeared to Solomon twice. God didn't appear to people. I mean, it's just, you read the Bible, this didn't happen a whole lot. Abraham and Jacob, and there was some, but it didn't happen that much. People in our day have God appearing to them all the time, I guess, but It really, you read the Bible, it didn't happen a whole lot. And so here, author makes a point of saying this, you know. Solomon was so special, God appeared to him twice. But God was very angry with Solomon, all right, because his heart was turned. Why was his heart turned? Because he said, well, don't take many wives and don't take any foreign wives. And Solomon said, well, you know, we got to expand the kingdom, right? And if we do that, we got to have these foreign women. We got to marry them. And I can expand. And God's saying, no, don't do that. Don't multiply horses. He tells them all these things not to do, and Solomon does it anyway. But wait a minute, he was the wisest man. This was absolute foolishness, and that's why Ecclesiastes, he's in 20/20 hindsight, the end of his life, and he's going, this is pretty bad stuff. So, judgment came upon Solomon and his kingdom, and Solomon didn't always see it in his day, but in Rehoboam and the others, it was a disaster. What did we have? We had 8 good kings in Judah, 19 kings in the north, and all 19 were bad. So nothing good came out of this. So the last one in 2nd Chronicles, this one's a little more fun, I guess, because you would think you could have rationalized with what happened. 2nd Chronicles 35, this is King Josiah, 20 through 24. And after all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, came up to fight against Carchemish by the Euphrates, and Josiah went out against them. And he sent messengers to him, saying, what have I to do with thee, thou king of Judah? I come not against thee this day, but against the house wherewith I have war. Now listen to this. For God commanded me to make haste, forbear thee from meddling with God. So here this pagan king, Necho, doesn't know God. He knows God spoke to him. Right? And this was the God who she already introduced himself as the God of Israel to him. And Necho, he says, go up there and deal with the Assyrians is actually who they were going after. And it took a coalition to actually beat the Assyrians. And so you had Babylon and you had Egypt, and they're going to go at the Assyrian Empire and take it down. And Josiah was trying to stop him. And he says, don't do that. Don't meddle with God, right? Who's with me, that he destroy thee not. But nevertheless, see, I would rationalize, those guys are the enemy. That's bad Egypt, and they're coming through my territory to go up to, so I can cut them off and do this, but it doesn't say Josiah prayed about it, sought the Lord, none of that. He's just going to go and jump in his chariot and say, come on, guys, let's go stop. So it was done out of an emotional reaction. And so, nevertheless, Josiah would not turn his face from him. He disguised himself. What's he doing? It's like, well, I'll pretend I'm not Josiah. Maybe God won't see. I don't know what he's thinking. If I put glasses on and a mustache, God's not going to know that it's me. He's going to fool who? The king of Egypt? Who's he going to fool? He disguised himself that he might fight with him, and hearken not unto the words of Necho from the mouth of God. And he came to fight in the valley of Megiddo. And the archers shot at King Josiah, and the king said to his servants, have me away, for I am sore wounded. He got hit. And the servants therefore took him out of the chariot. They put him in a second chariot that he had, and they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died. He was the good king, right? This was the good king, one of the 8. Right? He created a revival in Judah. Right? He get back to the Word of God. Here he is. One stupid mistake. Right? Cost him his life. Could have cost a whole lot more, but it didn't. God was gracious. But he didn't pray about it. He didn't seek the Lord. He didn't do any of this. And he's got a pagan king that said, God told me to do it. He appeared to me. He told me, don't mess with me. Don't stop. Don't try to stop me. God will judge you. And God judged him. Took him out. So, a bigger issue than what we would think, but to Josiah, this wasn't that big of a deal. It's more important for me to try and stop this pagan king can come through my territory without permission. And he ends up in judgment. So wisdom should lead to a discreet life and living in verses 2 and 3. So let's go back to chapter 10. Now we've got too far here, huh? Verse 2. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left. And then let me read 3 also. He says, yea, also when he, that is a fool, walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he's a fool. And so it's kind of like your actions speak louder than words, he said, and you can demonstrate you're a fool just by what you do. But I thought it was kind of interesting, and I know it's kind of humorous, but he says, the right's on the right and the left's on the wrong, and I thought, this has got to be political. I mean, that's what we, so I had to chuckle through the whole thing, because that's what we say. I'm on the right, so I'm right, but the left is always wrong, aren't they? And that's a political thing. Bill?
And what you're bringing up, Pastor Tom, is why I like the New American Standard rendering.
Okay, go ahead.
It reads, a wise man's heart directs him toward the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him toward the left.
So that's it. So, case solved. Yeah, so when I'm doing this, I'm laughing. So I'm thinking, this is so funny. It's like, the left is wrong. I should show it to my sister because she's a lefty. She didn't believe the Bible anyway. But I was like, but it says it right here. You're wrong. Anyway, God's got a sense of humor, I guess. He put it in there. So, but I think the point being is, and Bill pointed out, it's a spiritual walk, is what he's really talking about, our spiritual walk. So the person on the right is going to follow what's right in the eyes of God. And so there's this idea of, sometimes it says, don't go to the left hand or don't go to the right, stay on the straight and narrow path. Sometimes it uses that analogy. But in this analogy, it's stay on the right because the right is right. If you go to the left, that's wrong. And he's dealing with, the orientation of life for the righteous and living wisely in the world. That's kind of the emphasis there. And, sometimes we don't always do what we want to do either. Paul talks about this in Romans 7. The things that I want to do, I end up not doing because I'm in this battle with my own flesh, right? And my flesh dwells no good thing. And so, but even in the midst of that, Paul still, it was a desire. He wanted to do what was right because he had the Spirit of God in him. And it was kind of, I do want to do this, but then I end up botching things up sometimes. So the right pictures the wise person in an attempt to live wisely, skillfully, purposely in this world, up and against the fool who goes to the left, which is to say everything he does is kind of foolish and messy and unwise and is living in probably just sinful type of living. And so verse 3 deals with ordinary situations in life. A fool shows himself to be a fool because everything he does is false. So in other words, your actions speak louder than your words. We know you're a fool because of what you're doing. And that's what he says here, where he says his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool, right? It's broadcast. He can put a sign on him, hey, I'm a fool, right? And he doesn't need a sign, just watch what he's doing, right? And so it's inconsistent with his testimony. So if you go back to verse 1, where he says, you can ruin your testimony, you can ruin your reputation, it's because a fool lives inconsistently. So it could be an unregenerate person, it could be a saved person. Brother Chris.
There's a hesitate to use the word friend. It's an associate. Someone I know.
Okay.
I've known for years in West Bend. Got himself in a lot of trouble in the spring. And he's been in the news. He's saved. He's a fool.
Mm-hmm.
And his lifestyle is one that anyone would look at him would think that he's repulsive to them.
Mm-hmm.
His behavior, things he's done, got him in a lot of trouble. And looking him up and seeing some of the things he said on YouTube, that have recorded in public meetings, he says the truth. Comes to these meetings and he puts these officials on the line,
Okay.
but his his syntax, his speech, none of it reflects well. He's saying the right things, but he says them in a bad way. And I think of him when I think of this because you can't talk to him and help him understand. It's like the person with the beat up, awful, terrible looking vehicle with all the Christian stickers all over it. So you realize this doesn't look good.
Right.
Or the person who is engaged in road rage with
Right.
the thou shalt, not offend thy neighbor sticker on the back,
Yeah.
You gotta be careful.
Right.
And, but this, when I think of this person that I know, and, he knows the Lord, and boy, I'll tell you what, he just can't, he doesn't communicate it in a way that it's terribly offensive, and he just turns people away. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that walked away thinking very poorly of Christians because of this person's testimony. And it's a real conundrum. What do you do?
Well, like you said, some of these people you can't talk to,
No.
right? If you sat down and tried to point these things out,
Right.
where do you even receive it?
He won't because, and when I say he, I mean, they won't, a person like that, they're very angry at what they see around them. They don't have the wherewithal to communicate it in a way that's being received. It's like the quiet man versus the fool that shouted.
Right.
You really, what Solomon's saying here, I think, as Christians, we really have to look at what we're doing. It's one thing to demonstrate, it's another thing to demonstrate. You gotta think about
It's how you
how
do it.
you're being
Sure.
received. You may be demonstrating against something that is vile, or God doesn't know about it. God didn't know that was gonna happen. He knew, and so you gotta think about everything. It's not that you don't, it's just how do you do it?
Right. Yeah, how do you portray yourself and maintain a good testimony and get the point across at the same time? Absolutely. Yeah, and we've seen many of that, people in the Christian community that, they basically blow their testimony, the way they handle things in a public manner, and it's like you said, sometimes they're angry. Doesn't mean they're not saved, but they should have been walking in the Spirit, and they should have thought things through a little bit better. And you have, all different things. I always remember this one guy we knew, and this is back in Indiana. He worked at the grocery store. Everybody liked him. He professed to be a Christian. I talked to him a few times. But he lived kind of loose. I mean, really loose. And, but everybody liked him. And he was such a friendly guy. He worked at the grocery store. I don't know if he was a manager or what, but he would just he'd go overboard to help you. And, but he liked to drink. He liked to, and not that he was an alcoholic, but he used to go out, and people knew that about him, and it was kind of a bad testimony. And as time went on, he was doing other things that were just, I always go, I don't know if this guy's even a believer, some of the things he would say and do. And then one night, I was actually I was a volunteer chaplain at the hospital, and I get a call at midnight. And that's always when they call, between midnight and 2 is when you would get it. It was always on Saturday. And I'm like praying, don't let anybody have an accident tonight because I got to get up and preach in the morning, right? So anyway, I get the call and I go down there, and it's Mitch, and he's dead on the table. He's dead on the table, his head's split open. And I go, I know him. Right. His wife comes, I got there first, his wife came in, was hysterical. And she professed to be a Christian. I don't know if she really was. There were 3 churches involved because it was a split family, a divorced family, and the kids went to the Grace Brethren Church, and she went to the Presbyterian Church, and he went to the Methodist. We had all these different pastors coming in, and then it was such a big deal. The head chaplain, who was an evangelical free pastor, he came in. All these people. I mean, it was big news in the community. He was probably 35, 40 years old, something like that. So, and I always thought, after we worked through this, I think God took him home. I honestly believe this was a sin unto death. And probably people had talked to him about his testimony, but, he was a likable guy, but he didn't have a good testimony. you know. And God's, like you were saying, God knows, and God deals with people. And it put the fear of God in me that night. I never forgot it. Never forgot it. And he was in his car, and his wife said, I don't even understand how this happened. She was following him. He liked to race, but she said he was into the NASCAR thing. He was a race guy. A lot of Indiana people are, right? But she said he started off going real quick, but then she said he slowed down, and he was only going 35, and all of a sudden the car totally went off the road and went right into a tree. She said there was nobody coming; it just went. And she ran to the car, and his head was split open at 35 miles an hour. She said, I don't know how this happened. He could have been dead, and I thought he was dead before he hit that tree. And I think God just took him right up. That's my opinion. Sorry for the story, but it woke me up that day. I never forgot it. To this very day, I still remember it. 1 John 5, there's a sin unto death. And God sees us, and he knows our hearts, and he knows what we're doing. And he's not going to tolerate it forever. And if it gets to the point where your testimony is so bad, like your friend, it could happen. So why don't we end there, because I don't want to get into the next point, unless anybody has any thoughts or comments. Yeah, David?
I have something that sort of relates. I feel funny every time I go down my street and there's garbage everywhere. And I'm just murmuring in my spirit the whole time. Not out loud, people can't hear me, that type of thing. But God knows my heart, and I'm praying some of them get zapped, and it's just, I just think to myself, if you just, you don't live here, we live here, but you're just driving down the street, and then they just toss their garbage out, and it makes the whole neighborhood look bad. So I'm out there picking the stuff up and murmuring and complaining and thinking, wow, man, that just shows you your heart. But it's something simple that you can do. And actually, what's really bad about it? There's a garbage can right there, and they throw the stuff out on the street right in front of the garbage can. The garbage can's right there. So that irks me, something fierce, and I guess it shouldn't, but I get worked up about that.
Well, that's part of the depravity of man. I know we got together with the community and we did this pickup. And we're right on Groundier Road. Man, what garbage.
Yeah.
What garbage is.
Right, it's everywhere.
I was just there for an hour. I had three bags of garbage. Big bags, not little bags. 3 bags of garbage that I picked up. And we just did basically one side of the road. We started on the other, and it started raining, and then I had to go. But and the people that went, we got the clean stuff. That's what they told us. Oh, it's not as bad going this way. So me and this other guy went to the side that wasn't so bad. The other, and it was true. The other side was just terrible. But people got to go out and pick up the trash because other people don't know enough to put it in a garbage can.
They got to get that commercial back with the Indian, and he's got a tear coming down his eye when he sees all of the trash.
Yeah, I remember that one.
Right.
Hey, we're going to close here. Father, thank you for your grace and many lessons in Ecclesiastes as we look at so many of these proverbial statements. And the application is many applications into our own life. So we do pray your blessing now on the service as we wrap up here, get our hearts ready to receive the word of God, and we give thanks in Jesus' name.